Hey guys, tonight we slip into the soft twilight of a world where stars aren't just for wishing on, they're for whispering secrets too, measuring seasons by, and maybe deciding which cousin you can marry. Welcome to the highlands of ancient Ethiopia. It's chilly out, but not in a bad way. You're wrapped in a cotton shawl dyed deep indigo, woven tight enough to keep the wind out, loose enough to breathe. The earth beneath your feet is volcanic and rich, and your sandals crunch on gravel that might be older than language itself. Somewhere nearby, a hyena laughs. It's not directed at you probably. Overhead, the sky is impossibly vast. No streetlights, no neon signs, no planes with blinking lights. Just a canvas of stars so bright they almost feel ... personal. You're standing in the ancient kingdom of Axum, somewhere between the 4th and 7th centuries CE. Not quite an empire anymore, but still proud, still mysterious. If you've come looking for drama, war, or plagues, well, tough luck. The real action here tonight is above your head. Towering beside you is a granite stele, 50 feet tall and etched with mysterious symbols that archaeologists still haven't fully agreed on. Some think they're tomb markers, others think they were meant to impress visiting traders. A few insist they're aligned with the stars, though which stars, exactly, is still up for debate. It leans slightly, like it's listening in on your conversation with the cosmos. You wonder if it's supposed to. This spot isn't marked on any ancient tourist brochure. But if you ask the right elders and bring them good honey wine, they'll lead you here, to this slope just outside the city ruins, where astronomy, religion, and whispered superstition all tangle like the roots of an ancient juniper. Your guide tonight is a Dabtara priest, but also a healer, a scribe, a mathematician, and by the looks of it, someone who hasn't blinked in 2 hours. His robe is threadbare but clean, his beard peppered with white. You get the feeling he's not here for your benefit. The stars are his real audience. He walks barefoot, leading you up a slope worn into smoothness by centuries of pilgrim feet. The path is lit only by moonlight and the flicker of a clay lantern he carries with steady hands. You try not to trip over the roots or look too out of breath. He's at least twice your age, and gliding uphill like a ghost on an escalator. At the summit, he stops beside what looks like a small stone pool carved into the bedrock. He sets down, the lantern lets out a sigh, and gestures to it. This, he says in GS, the ancient liturgical tongue, is the mirror. You peer in, it's just water, still and dark, reflecting the stars above. But something about it feels precise, reverent, like the bowl itself is a calendar, or a lens, or maybe a clock set to cosmic time, he explains slowly, as if to a student with potential but not much promise that this bowl is part of their nightly ritual. They watch the stars rise and ripple in it, measuring their angles, their lateness, their mood, even. It's not astrology, not exactly, it's something softer, something more ... relational, a kind of stargazing that doesn't seek to control or predict, but to participate. You lie down beside the bowl, using your shawl as a pillow. The stone beneath you is cold but smooth. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of sage, eucalyptus, and fire smoke that still lingers in the air from earlier rituals. Somewhere, someone is singing softly, a chant that doesn't ask for anything, just a melody sent into the stars like a postcard with no return address. Above you, the constellations blaze. Not Orion or the Big Dipper, those are Greek names, and here in Axum the stars have their own meanings. That bright one in the east, locals call it Arwa's eye, after the Serpent King said to rule the underworld. That dusty stripe of Milky Way, it's known as the Ancestors' Road, not just poetic literal. People believe spirits travel along it to return for blessings or to complain about the condition of their graves. Your guide sits cross-legged beside you, pulling from his satchel a small parchment covered in script so ancient it looks like it was written by moonlight itself. He hums as he traces a diagram. Stars, or maybe saints, or possibly both. In this world, astronomy and theology flirt constantly. Sometimes they marry. He points out a red star just above the horizon. That one, he murmurs, hasn't moved. In 4 days we watch it. It may be listening. You're about to ask what that means, but his gaze says not to. He doesn't mean it in a predictive sense. He means it the way one might say a friend is in a quiet mood. The stars here aren't symbols, they're personalities. They have patterns and opinions. They have history. Some of them, locals believe, even have grudges. Beside the pool, someone begins tapping a small drum, not rhythmically, not like a performance. Slow, steady beats, like a heartbeat echoing through stone. You breathe with it, syncing up without trying. The air seems to thicken. The stars shimmer just a little brighter. Or maybe you're getting sleepy. Either way, you've stopped worrying about your feet. You're not sure how long you lie there, an hour, maybe 2, but time slips away the way candle wax slips down copper, silently, slowly, with a faint golden sheen. Eventually, you realize something strange. Nobody's asking the stars for answers. They're not demanding prophecy or demanding explanations. They're just listening. The Dabtara, the chants, the villagers who trek up here in the dry season, they're all participating in a kind of cosmic calandrus, a quiet conversation that's been going on for centuries. You roll onto your side, glancing up at the towering stele once more. It leans gently eastward, toward the place the sun will rise, toward the direction prayers are whispered, toward the star your guide says is listening. Somewhere behind you, someone snores softly, and somehow that makes perfect sense. You wake not with a jolt, but the slow, syrupy kind of awareness that only comes when the stars have been watching you for a while. You're still under the sky, still near the water bowl that mirrors the heavens, but the night feels deeper, now quieter. Even the hyenas seem to have turned in for the night. Your Daptera guide hasn't moved. He's still cross-legged, still humming that same three-note chant that loops like an old cassette stuck in the most tranquil glitch imaginable. His eyes are closed, but his fingers tap the stone rhythmically. You're not sure if he's meditating, praying, or mentally calculating the next market day based on Venus's mood. A tiny lantern flickers near his satchel, illuminating a scroll partially unfurled beside him. You catch a glimpse of neat, tightly packed script GS letters, curved and elegant like vines. This is no bedtime poetry. This is the real deal. Ethiopia's lunar calendar, born of moon watching, star measuring, and centuries of whispered adjustments. You sit up slowly, careful not to knock over the water bowl. He finally speaks, his voice like gravel stirred with honey. Do you know why the calendar sleeps in 12 dreams and wakes in 13? You blink. Not the sort of riddle your modern brain was prepared for, but you shake your head no. Curious. He nods toward the stars. 12 months, yes. But our year has 13. The last one is short of 5 or 6 days. It's 4 things that don't belong anywhere else. It's true. Ethiopia still follows this calendar to date 30-day months. And one little month that's like a celestial junk drawer. Forgotten birthdays, overdue taxes, that cousin who returned from the city unexpectedly, all crammed into that bonus slice of time the rest of the world pretends doesn't exist. Historians still argue whether the Ethiopian calendar came entirely from Egyptian systems or developed independently. There are certainly echoes of timekeeping here, lunar tracking, star risings, even the ancient obsession with precise rituals at dawn. But the Daptar insists it's older than pharaohs, older than logic. It came to us, he says cryptically, from a voice behind the moon. You try not to ask follow-up questions. He's not in the mood for explaining metaphor. Instead, you follow him down a narrow path, flanked by whispering eucalyptus trees. Their long leaves brush your shoulders, tickling like cool feathers. At the base of the hill, hidden among rocks and brush, stands a small stone structure round, with a conical thatch roof, like the kind you'd expect in a fairy tale if that fairy tale featured astronomy exams. Inside, the air is thick with frankincense and old books. This is where the Daptera and his fellow calendar keepers sleep or try to. Most nights they lie awake passing moon phases and counting the days between epiphanies. You notice rows of wooden tablets etched with star symbols and lunar glyphs. One of them features a delicate carving of a crescent moon cradling a lamb. Your guide taps it reverently. Lamb moon, he says. That's when we share. Not before. It's not just agricultural, it's spiritual. Every act is synced to a rhythm older than memory. There's a right time to plant, a right time to travel, a right time to propose marriage. And if you do it offbeat well, the universe doesn't get mad. It just gets ... complicated. Back outside. He leads you to a clearing. There, a cluster of younger Dapteras, maybe apprentices, sit in a half circle, reading from wax-coated notebooks. One of them is gently correcting another's star diagram with a stylus, mumbling something about Sirius being stubborn. This month you're not sure if it's a technical issue or a personality flaw. They pause to let you sit among them. One offers you a cup of local barley beer. It's slightly sour, a little fizzy, and entirely refreshing. You sip as they begin reciting calendar chants, slow and low like a lullaby written by mathematicians. It's mesmerizing. Each phrase corresponds to a celestial event. One chant lists phases of the moon. Another marks the shifting winds by referencing the migration of ibises. There's even one that predicts a solar eclipse with unsettling accuracy, though it also claims bread will fall upwards that same week, so ... grain of salt. Still, there's a practical beauty in how they've mapped the intangible into something chantable, something holdable, in a place where seasons can shift subtly, and the line between drought and abundance hangs on a handful of days. This kind of precision matters. Even if the tools are drums, songs, and carved sticks instead of satellites. You lie back again, eyes fluttering towards sleep, and wonder how many generations have learned to keep time not with ticking clocks, but with lilting voices and shared memory. These men, barefoot priests and skygazers, don't just observe the stars. They sleep beside them, they eat in their rhythm. They live like time is something sacred, not something to chase. The Dabtar notices your eyes drooping and chuckles. Good. The stars don't like too many questions. You smile, letting your breath slow with the rhythm of the chants. The eucalyptus leaves above sway like green metronomes, and somewhere overhead, the moon begins its slow rise into the lamb. Quarter, right on cue. The moon is high now, almost smug in its fullness, as if it knows tonight's secrets better than you ever will. You're not alone in this. Even the Dabtaras seem to treat it with wary reverence. their chants growing quieter as its glow intensifies. You're walking now, slow and barefoot like everyone else, across a narrow stone path that winds between terraces of dark soil and sleeping teff fields. The breeze carries the scent of barley husk and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowing in its sleep answers a hyena in the hills. Neither seems particularly bothered by the other. You arrive at a flat-roofed stone house or royal observatory, or at least what passes for one in 6th century Axum. The structure is humble, more storage shed than scientific temple, but this is where kings once climbed to read the night sky like a living diary. The walls are etched with shallow grooves, marks, or so you're told, lines showing where certain stars would rise and set during the solstices, equinoxes, or rainy seasons. Some scholars argue these were mere decorative scratches, nothing astronomical. Others insist this was a sacred royal almanac. Still others say both could be true after all. Ancient Ethiopia never felt the need to separate art, science, and worship. If something's beautiful, useful, and smells faintly of incense, it probably belongs. You reach the roof via a tight stone staircase, and suddenly the city opens before you in hush and shadow. The ruins of Axum shimmer below like fossilized coral in moonlight stone foundations. Collapsed palaces, the faint geometry of roads once bustling with ivory traders, incense merchants, and at least one camel who absolutely refused to be housebroken here. On this roof, kings once gathered with priests and herbalists and maybe a few favored scribes to gaze upward. Not just for beauty, not even just for omens, but for timing. Axumite monarchs. It turns out we're absolutely obsessed with timing. You can almost hear the conversation. If we crown the prince when Canopus rises, the rains will be good. But if Mars is in the southern quarter, won't that anger the spirits of the old kings? Well, unless we sacrifice a white goat, or possibly wear red, the scrolls disagree. It's not superstition in the way you might think. It's more like cosmological etiquette. The stars weren't gods, but they were close enough to deserve good manners. You settle onto a woven mat, the straw creaking under your weight. A dabtura places a clay dish of hot cola-roasted barley and chickpeas into your hands. You eat slowly. It's warm, nutty, comforting, the perfect stargazing snack. And then something strange happens. As your eyes adjust, you begin to see faint etchings in the floor symbols only visible in moonlight. Not elaborate constellations or Egyptian-style zodiacs, simpler circles, arrows, dots arranged in clusters. One looks suspiciously like a goat. You point, your guide says, not looking up. That's the rain calendar. Rain doesn't follow the Gregorian calendar here. It follows its own rules. It listens to Sirius, the dog star, whose rising often heralds the beginning of the wet season. Farmers track Sirius like Wall Street traders track the dollar dot. In fact, Sirius is considered so important. Some legends say it once walked the earth disguised as a white dog who taught humans to dig irrigation canals. Others say he was a star who fell in love with a mortal and watered her crops with dew from his cloak. Historians, predictably, still argue over which story came first, but the impact is real. Even today, rural farmers in the Ethiopian highlands will wake early in June to check if Sirius is visible just before dawn. If it is, they know. Time to plow. If not, wait, don't plant. The stars are not in the mood. Back in the Royal Observatory, the mood is gentle but focused. Two of the younger dabturas are debating the correct time to begin the annual mescal flower ceremony based, naturally, on the angle of the Pleiades. One argues for a moonrise sighting. The other insists on a sunrise alignment. Their elder rolls his eyes and mutters something about how in his day, stars had manners. They eventually agreed to consult an old manuscript tucked in a cedarwood box at the edge of the platform. It's wrapped in goat leather, tied with a fraying cord. Inside are faded drawings, some geometric, others more interpretive. One sketch appears to show a lion with 3 tails roaring at a mountain. You decide not to ask as you lie back, again, full of colo and curiosity. You let your thoughts drift. You think about how these royal ceremonies depended so heavily on celestial choreography. Not just coronations, but planting seasons, feast days, even military campaigns. There's a record from the 5th century somewhere deep in the monasteries that claims a battle was delayed for 3 weeks because Venus was sulking in the wrong quadrant. You laugh quietly. You delay a battle for less. Up above, Sirius begins to rise. Your guide lifts his head slightly, nods once, and whispers a short prayer you don't quite catch. Something about light and rhythm and the mercy of the sky. You close your eyes and feel the cool of the mat under you, the heat of roasted barley in your belly, and the soft hum of a kingdom sinking itself to the stars like a lullaby written across the firmament. Sleep brushes your temples. The stars lean just a little closer. You wake again, but this time the stars feel less like spectators and more like companions. You don't sit up right away. Instead, you blink into the darkness and let the sounds return first. The faint swish of wind over grass, the distant hoot of a nightbird, and the rhythmic creak of someone grinding something in a wooden bowl. You're no longer on the rooftop, but nestled near a humble homestead perched on the edge of a terraced hillside. The air smells of roasted grain, waxy wood smoke, and something sweet, maybe honey, maybe fermenting fruit. You're here to learn something very important: how to predict the rain with a bronze bowl, a goat's stomach, and perhaps most crucially deep respect for the absurdity of nature. An elderly woman beckons you over. Her name is Imamachu, and she's known in the area as the one who sings the rain awake. She wears a shawl woven in stripes of faded red and deep blue, and when she speaks, her voice sounds like thunder politely clearing its throat. She sets down the wooden mortar and points to a polished bronze bowl, resting on a tripod carved from acacia. Around it lie half a dozen small stones, shaped and worn from years of handling. A gourd filled with water sits nearby. You're not at an observatory anymore. You're in a different kind of laboratory, one that deals in herbs, animal behavior, and celestial hunches. She explains her method. First, she fills the bowl with clean water. Then she waits for the surface to still completely, utterly still. This could take minutes or hours, and only then does she drop a single stone in. If the ripples bend a certain way, the rains are coming. If not, well, she might check again tomorrow. Or watch the goat. Yes, the goat. Its name is Wandamu, and it's lying about 5 feet away, chewing something invisible. According to Imamachu, Wandamu is an excellent forecaster. When his belly groans during a full moon, she says, the river will flood within 9 days. You nod solemnly, as one should when confronted with wisdom that has clearly outlived several governments. This isn't a fringe belief. In fact, Ethiopian farmers across generations have relied on a combination of astronomical, biological, and intuitive signals to guide their decisions. Rain isn't just weather, it's fate, it's economy, it's survival. Knowing when it will arrive or not can mean the difference between feast and famine. She points up to a star, clustered twinkling above the ridge. Those are the 7 cattle, she says. If they scatter before dawn, we must dig drainage trenches. You squint. The stars don't look like cattle, they barely look like anything. But she sees them, as did her grandmother, and her grandmother's grandmother before her. That's the thing about oral tradition. It doesn't care whether you're convinced, it just continues. Historians still argue whether these folk astronomies qualify as real science or cultural storytelling. But then again, those same historians often need GPS to find the parking lot. So perhaps we shouldn't judge too quickly. You sip from a wooden cup of fresh Tage honey wine, lightly fermented, the kind that makes your lips tingle and your thoughts stretch like cats in the sun. Imamichu watches the bowl. The stars reflect off the water's surface in long silvery streaks. Then, ever so gently, a ripple crosses the surface. No stone, no wind. She smiles. For days, you don't ask what that means. You just nod and make a mental note to buy an umbrella nearby. Another woman joins Imamatu's daughter, judging by the identical eyebrow shape and unmistakable air of "I know better." She brings with her a folded cloth and unrolls it on the ground. Inside are dried leaves, pieces of polished bone, and what appears to be a beetle shell painted with tiny red dots. She explains that this, too, is part of the ritual. The stars speak through the sky, but they also echo in the small, strange movements of earthly things. A cracked seed pod may reflect the tension in Venus's orbit. A curled leaf may mirror the crescent moon's upcoming mischief. You realize, slowly, that you're witnessing a full-body cosmology, one where heaven and earth are not distant, but constantly flirting. The bowl, the goat, the stars, they're all part of one complex, giggling conversation. Imamachu begins humming. It's not a song you recognize. No words, just a melody that seems to match the tempo of the wind. It rises slightly, falls, then loops again. The water in the bowl responds not literally, but spiritually. You feel it. Like the night itself is agreeing with her, and then you hear it. A faint rumble, not thunder, your own stomach. You haven't eaten since ... whenever the last star chant ended. Imamichu laughs and offers you a warm handful of injera torn from a cloth bundle. It's tangy, soft, and oddly comforting, like edible memory. You eat, sip, and watch the stars twinkle as the bronze bowl quietly mirrors their silent gestures. Time stretches, minute becomes a lullaby, an hour becomes a blink, and all the while Wandamu the goat continues chewing, completely unfazed by cosmic matters. When the wind picks up again, Imamachu collects her tools, pats your shoulder, and mutters something like, "May the stars find your feet before your fears do." You think that's a blessing, or maybe a gentle roast. You lie back on the earth again, using your rolled shawl as a pillow. The soil beneath you is warm now, the air thick with the smell of herbs and the hint of oncoming rain. You close your eyes. The bronze bowl rests beside you, still watching, whispering in above. The 7 cattle continue their slow, deliberate migration across the sky. The clouds are starting to move in slowly, like old dancers taking the floor again after decades away. You're still lying near Imamatu's home, the bronze bowl beside you now filled with tiny specks of stardust, or maybe just dust depending on your mood. But even now, the stars aren't finished with you tonight. You're chasing one in particular, a star that once made ancient Ethiopians nervous, poetic, and unusually creative with their coffee grounds. Its name, well, it didn't have a consistent one, but you'd know it today as Halley's Comet. Yes, the same one that gets blamed for medieval famines, bad haircuts, and the occasional pope's paranoia. In ancient Ethiopia, it was a celestial wildcard, a wandering omen that refused to play by the rules of polite stargazing, and people noticed. Word spreads fast in the Highland Kingdom when Halley showed up around 530 CE, glowing like a furious thumbprint in the eastern sky. People gathered in market squares and churchyards to stare. Some prayed, some fasted, some started composing chants so that the comet wouldn't take offense and, say, rearrange their livestock. You're sitting now among a group of scribes and monks under a thatched awning lit by oil lamps. One of them is reading from a manuscript that crackles when opened. The text is dense, looping, and full of poetic euphemisms for cosmic panic. The scribe clears his throat and translates loosely for your benefit. A firestar has dragged its tail through the eye of the priest. You blink, it means, he clarifies, someone important is about to die, possibly a bishop or a goat. The monks nod grimly. Goats are expensive. And yet, not all feared the comet. Some viewed it as a divine messenger and a punctuation mark in the sky. After all, why would God go to the trouble of sending a blazing light across the heavens if it didn't have something important to say? There are stories half recorded, half whispered of Dabtoris standing on mountaintops, arms outstretched, chanting verses not found in any psalter, words invented just for the occasion. One tale speaks of a scholar named Tesfahan who brewed a special kind of coffee with wild rosemary and drank it while staring into the comet's tail, claiming he could see the past unraveling like a dropped scroll. Modern historians, being the skeptics they are, argue whether these events were ever directly connected to Halley's visits. Correlation isn't causation, they mutter over their conference coffee. But if you ask a Highland elder, they'll likely say, well, it did not cause that flood. You're offered a cup of that same wild rosemary coffee, bitter, thick, and served in a cup with no handle, because life's better when you have to earn it. The flavor is ... assertive, like a small, angry poem for your tongue, but it wakes something up in you. Not alertness, not clarity, just a sense that maybe, just maybe, the stars are watching and occasionally raising an eyebrow. You ask the scribe why they thought the comet came. He shrugs, to remind us the sky has opinions. That answer feels suspiciously correct. Another monk rolls out a scroll showing ink sketches of past comets. They're all variations on a theme, a glowing head with a streaking tail, sometimes with wings, sometimes with a face. One image has the comet throwing spears at the sun. Another shows it raining fish onto a monastery roof. You suspect artistic license. Still, these illustrations weren't made just to pass the time. They were records, part celestial journal, part survival manual. If the comet appeared again and strange things followed, they'd be ready, prepared to fast, sing, avoid lentils, or whatever else history seemed to require. You glance up at the now overcast sky and wonder. How many people over the centuries looked up at that same wandering star and asked if they were doing okay? Because comets don't explain. They just show up, blazing and bright, then vanish without comment. Like that relative who brings you a gift and immediately leaves without saying hello. Back at the fire, someone begins to sing. It's not a hymn, exactly. More like a call and response about things that visit uninvited, jackals, dreams, lost stars. The others join in. You hum along, catching the tune, letting your voice blend into the ancient quiet. A young novice leans over and whispers, if you dream of a comet, you must offer honey to the sky by morning. You smile, filing that away next to goat belly rumblings and moon-beaten soup. The universe, it seems, has its own etiquette, and you're starting to understand it, not with your mind, but your rhythm, your breath, your half-drowsy awe. The monks begin rolling up their scrolls, the fire shrinking to embers. The comet, for now, has returned to its slumber. But you know it'll be back. Maybe not in your lifetime, but someone else will look up and see its fire sweeping past the eye of the priest, and they'll whisper, and they'll listen, and they'll offer honey to the stars. You're back on the move. This time, through a small highland village where everything seems designed to point you upward. The rooftops slope like arrows, the trees sway like fingers, and even the children tilt their heads back mid-laughter to watch something invisible above. It's as if the entire village lives in conversation with the sky ant tonight. You're invited to eavesdrop. Your destination is a wide stone field just outside the village boundary. No buildings here, just open air and low stone circles arranged deliberately. The elders say it's a sacred place. Not sacred like altars and incense, but sacred like tea with your ancestors, or socks that always match by accident. You're met by a lanky man with a crooked walking stick and a woven bag, full of dried figs. He introduces himself simply as Hailu but makes no effort to explain the stick. He nods toward the sky. You're here for the beasts. Yes, you nod, though you're not entirely sure which beasts. Hailu drops his bag and draws a rough star map in the dirt with the stick. It's abstract, sure, but you begin to see the shapes. lions, hyenas, a bull. Constellations with stories that have nothing to do with Greek heroes or Roman vanity. That one, he says, pointing to a jagged cluster, is Azor the lion with no tail. He guards the moon when she's tired. You nod solemnly. You know the feeling. Across ancient Ethiopia, the sky was full of creatures, some borrowed from Nile Valley cosmologies, others born from local lore. Many had agricultural significance. The lion marked the season of short rains. The bull aligned with the barley harvest, and the hyena. No one was entirely sure, but his arrival usually meant someone's aunt was about to start trouble. Historians still argue whether these stars came from cross-cultural contact or evolved independently. The Axumites had deep trade routes across the Red Sea, down into Nubia, even brushing the edges of the Arabian Peninsula. But whether a lion in the sky was born from Egyptian influence or simply from watching too many real lions hunt under starlight, no one knows for sure. You sit beside Hailu as he crushes a fig between his fingers and points to a shimmering patch in the west. That one's Zeritu. She was a weaver, married a star and made his clothes from starlight, but he cheated. So she took his belt and threw it across the sky. You follow his hand and see 3 bright stars in a row, what Westerners call Orion's belt. But here, it's an angry wife's celestial revenge. You can't help but smile. The stars here don't behave. They argue, forget things, play tricks. They're not pristine mathematical points. They're part of the village, with egos and secrets, and somehow that makes them more trustworthy. Another elder arrives, this one carrying a flute made from polished bone. He plays a tune that rises and falls with the wind, and the villagers begin to gather. Some carry clay cups, others bundles of herbs. Children sit on their parents' laps, pointing to the stars they've named themselves. There's no formal ceremony, just presence, storytelling, recognition that these shapes in the sky are old. Neighbors, sometimes quiet, sometimes dramatic, always watching. You lie back in the grass, eyes wide. The lion constellation does seem to crouch now that you're looking for it, and the weaver's belt glitters just a little more defiantly. You wonder how many nights were spent inventing these characters, these sky beasts, these cautionary tales about love, jealousy, weather, and lentil prices. Hailu offers you a roasted maize cob. It's warm, charred, and exactly what your stargazing fingers needed. You eat quietly, watching the constellations shuffle ever so slowly across the velvet black. Someone begins to chant. It's a lullaby to the lion star. The words are simple, almost nonsense, but they carry a rhythm that lulls even the more skeptical children into a hushed dot, and then the quiet is broken deliberately. A young woman stands, holds up a stick carved with animal patterns, and recites a fable about a giraffe who climbed into the stars to escape his debts. Everyone laughs. You don't entirely understand the joke, but you laugh too. It's contagious. That's the thing about these constellations. They're not fixed. They shift depending on the story, the season, the storyteller. Some nights the lion has a tail, other nights he's missing an ear. It doesn't matter. The point isn't consistency, it's connection. In a world where oral history is sacred, the stars aren't textbook diagrams. They're reminders of harvests, betrayals, family reunions, and that one goat who got stuck on the church roof. They are the village in the sky, doing what your own village does below, living, arguing, drifting toward dawn. As you close your eyes, Hailu pats your shoulder. The stars remember who watches them, and with that the lion curls up near the moon. The weaver adjusts her stolen belt, and the hyena waits for just the right moment to gossip. You're beginning to notice a pattern. Not in the stars. Necessarily they're still doing their slow nightly tango, but in the people who observe them. None of them claim ownership. No one insists their interpretation is final. Instead, they sit beside the cosmos like old friends who've agreed to disagree on everything except dinner. Tonight, you're not in a village. You're at a remote monastery halfway up a mountain so steep that even the mules have developed philosophical expressions. The air here is thinner, the stars sharper, and the silence, it's the kind that makes you feel like your own thoughts should whisper. This monastery doesn't show up in most books. The monks don't advertise, but word has it that centuries ago, one of them mapped the movement of Mars using nothing more than a piece of charcoal, a candle stub, and an obsessive relationship with window angles. His name was Abba Mekonnen, and his room still stands bare, cold, and filled with charts that no one's dared throw away. You enter with your guide, a stooped monk named Tessema who smells like parchment and old eucalyptus. He lights a single candle. Shadows stretch across the floor like cautious cats. Abba Mekonnen Tessema begins. Did not sleep much. You nod. That tracks according to oral accounts and a few half-deciphered scrolls. Mekonnen believed Mars was not just a planet. It was a servant of divine wrath, occasionally sulking, often meddling, but ultimately misunderstood. He watched it obsessively, not out of fear, out of fascination. His charts line the walls, drawn on hide, bark, and one suspiciously thin sheet of copper. They show Mars looping backward across the sky, what modern astronomers call retrograde motion. But Mekonnen didn't use that term. He called it the stubborn dance. Some pages contain annotations, red eye grumbles or Mars leans away from the sheep. One note simply reads, "Why?" You get the feeling Mekanan asked that question a lot. Taisei Ma kneels beside one large parchment and traces a finger along its faded curve. He noticed the dance before he learned the word. It made him unpopular. You raise an eyebrow. Not everyone liked that he drew what he saw, instead of what the old book said. Some accused him of sorcery. Historians still argue whether Mekanan was persecuted or just mildly scolded. The line between heresy and overenthusiasm was blurry in 14th century Ethiopia. But one thing is clear, he didn't stop charting. Night after night, he'd sit in this room, eyes fixed on Mars, measuring its shift relative to nearby stars. No telescope, no timepiece, just a wax-stripped candle holder and a prayer that the clouds would take a holiday. He developed a system. A wax thread stretched from wall to wall, marking where Mars appeared each night. When it shifted unexpectedly, he'd recite the Psalms backward and adjust the height of the candle. Why backward? To unconfuse the heavens, he supposedly said. Or maybe he just liked variety. You lie on the cold stone floor where he once sat, tilting your head toward the same small window he carved himself. Outside, Mars glows faintly red, just above the horizon. You try to imagine how it must have looked. To Mekanon, luminous, unruly, a divine toddler rolling across the firmament. He believed it had moods. Some nights, Mars brought dreams. Other nights, silence. Once during a long drought, he claimed it whispered to him. Rain will not come, it said. The goat lied. Tessimo chuckles when he reads that part aloud. It became a proverb, he explains. When someone speaks with false confidence, we say the goat lied about Mars. You mentally file that away for your next awkward family dinner. But here's the thing, Mekanan wasn't wrong. His maps, though crude, showed real planetary movement, retrograde opposition, even seasonal visibility patterns. He caught them all. He just didn't call them by the names we use now. Which begs the question, how many truths have been dismissed simply because they arrived dressed in strange metaphors? Outside, the wind shifts. You step out onto a stone ledge that overlooks a chasm of mist and silence. The stars blaze above, and Mars winks at you like it knows you've been reading its fan mail. You take a deep breath. Cold and pine-scented Taisei Ma joins you, holding 2 tiny cups of spiced tea. You sip it strong. Smoky hints of clove, and something else. Possibly regret. He tells you that monks here still track Mars, not because they believe it controls anything, but because it's a ritual of paying attention, of saying I see you, I remember you. You matter. In a world that moves too fast, that might be the purest form of prayer. You return to Mekanan's room and lie back on the woven mat laid for guests. The candle flickers on the windowsill. Mars slides slowly across its opening. No charts tonight, no scribbles, just silent watching, and, if you listen carefully, between your breaths you almost hear it whisper. The goat didn't mean it. The next morning, if you can even call it that, since the stars haven't fully left you on the move again, this time, down into the valleys, where the air is softer, the paths less philosophical, and the goats, somehow louder. You arrive at a cluster of stone homes nestled near a bend in the river. It's market day, but no one's in a rush. People sit, chew roasted barley, and argue over things like whose cousin said what to whom under which fig tree. It's all very peaceful, and yet everyone's watching the sky. Not the whole sky, though, just one point in particular, low in the east, barely visible through the haze of morning. It's Sirius the dog star blinking like someone testing a flashlight in fog, and you've shown up just in time for the most casual, community-wide, astronomical ritual you've ever seen. There's no telescope, no priest in robes, just a grandmother, a farmer, 3 gossiping teenagers, and a man stirring porridge who swears he once saw Sirius wink at him before it rained for 7 straight days. You settle on a small stool, warm from the sun. Someone hands you a calabash of sour milk, thick as pudding and tangy enough to make your eyelids reconsider their existence. It's surprisingly good. This isn't stargazing for science, this is stargazing for groceries. See, in this part of Ethiopia, Sirius is more than just a celestial light show. It's a seasonal signal. When it appears on the eastern horizon just before dawn, usually around late June, it's time to prep the fields, oil the plow, and make sure your neighbors aren't secretly hoarding seeds. The star doesn't always appear on schedule. Clouds get involved, so do moods. There are years when Sirius arrives early, and people shrug and say, it's just showing off. Other years it's late, and they blame it on the village rooster who crows at the wrong time. But when it does appear, everyone feels it. The porridge man gestures to the horizon. There she is, the thirsty dog. You squint. You think you see it, a bright flicker almost defiant in its clarity. It hovers just above the lip of the earth like it's deciding whether to rise or take the day. Off children are sent to fetch bundles of mescal flowers, not to celebrate yet, but to be ready. If Sirius sticks around, if it holds steady for 3 mornings in a row, the real preparations begin. Fencing for the cattle, cleaning the grain pits, whispering over the grain jars to wake them up gently. You ask why the stars rising matters so much. A nearby woman answers without looking at you, because the ground listens to her. You don't question it. She explains that her grandmother used to read Sirius not just for the rain, but for everything. When it shimmered unevenly, it meant the harvest would be unpredictable. When it blinked slowly, the cows would calve early. And once, when it appeared to read like a guilty eye, she says the village well dried up 3 weeks later. Historians, of course, would point out that Sirius's heliacal rising has long been tied to agriculture. The Egyptians used it to predict Nile flooding. The Greeks wrote poems about it. The Romans blamed it for their worst hangovers. But here in this Ethiopian valley, the star isn't just an omen, it's part of the household. There's even a song about it, a lullaby actually, which an elderly man starts singing now as he lounges on a straw mat. The lyrics translate roughly to asterisk, asterisk, bright sister, bring the clouds, call the wind, wash the goat's hooves. Asterisk, asterisk, you don't need to understand every word to feel its power. The rhythm is slow, repetitive, calming, like water dripping in a bowl, or the way firelight dances when you're too sleepy to follow. And while they sing, the chores begin. Women sweep the yards with bundled grass. Men test the strength of yoke ropes. Children chase each other with handfuls of sunflower seeds, all under the slowly fading light of Sirius, who continues her lazy blink just above the hills. You're invited to help with a very important task, carrying a jug of water up a hill to pour it into a sacred basin. It's a symbolic act, gifting water to the land before the land gives it back. The jug is heavier than expected. You wobble, you nearly trip on a chicken. You are not graceful, no one minds. At the top of the hill, you reach the basin, a stone hollow shaped like a thumbprint in the earth. You pour, the water glugs rhythmically, and as it settles, you catch Sirius reflected briefly on its surface before she vanishes into daylight. The porridge man is there too, leaning on his stick. She always leaves before the gossip gets boring. You sit with him for a moment, watching the last few stars retreat. You ask him how he knows Sirius has really come, how they can trust one flickering light to mean so much. He shrugs. When she shows up, we stop arguing. That's as good a reason as any. You close your eyes, the lullaby still echoing in your mind. Your hands are warm from the jug, your feet dusty from the climb. And somewhere in the early blue of morning, a star you've only just met has already disappeared, taking your questions, your curiosity, and perhaps your half-finished dreams with her. The stars are gone now, or at least hiding. Daylight has painted the sky with that familiar pale blue wash that makes you squint even when you're still half asleep. You're being led through a narrow pass that opens into a wide stone clearing, surrounded by silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the thick, woven hush of a place that's listening. You've arrived at one of Ethiopia's rock-hewn churches, the kind carved down into the earth rather than built up into it. Lalibela is the name on most tourist brochures, but this isn't one of the famous ones. This church has no name on a map, no tour group outside, and no one selling postcards shaped like crosses. Instead, it has shadows. You're here to learn about time, not by clocks or stars this time, but by how shadows fall on sacred stone. Your guide is Sister Alamechu, a nun with the posture of a ruler and the voice of a lullaby. She greets you with a nod and no words, then beckons you down a narrow set of stone steps that feel older than most mountains. At the base is the church, carved into the rock like a negative space cathedral, with smooth walls and geometric angles that catch the light just so. Sister Alamechu points to a wall with a shallow groove running vertically down its side. At first glance, it looks like an accident, like someone dragged a tool too far. But as she steps aside, you watch sunlight hit the groove and realize it splits the light into two neat panels. One narrow strip of light lands perfectly on a carved cross. The other lands on a small basin filled with water. This only happens, she says softly, on the solstice. You blink. It's not a trick of the eye. It's architectural precision by monks with no computers, no blueprints, and no interest in impressing engineers. Just a desire to let time speak for centuries. These churches acted not only as places of worship, but as celestial observatories. The monks here knew when to start the fasts, when to begin planting herbs in the courtyard garden, and when to prepare for saints' days not from written calendars, but from the way shadows moved through doorways. They watched how the sun hit certain carvings at certain hours, how reflections danced off stone floors, how candlelight bent on different feast days. They called this smecta or anticipation, reading the future, not in prophecy, but in geometry. You're led deeper inside. It's cool, dry, and smells faintly of beeswax and eucalyptus smoke. The only light now comes from slits in the ceiling, casting beams like divine spotlights. Sister Alamechu hands you a small, flat stone. Put it there, she says, pointing to a corner of the room where a series of dots are carved into the floor. You do. The beam of light from above shifts slightly and suddenly, the dot your stone sits on begins to glow. The others remain dim. That's how we know, she says. Know what? The rains are 10 days away. You blink again. This is not a weather app. This is not even meteorology. It's architecture that reads the sky and translates it through rock, a language spoken not aloud but through light space, and centuries of patience. Historians have found similar techniques in other parts of the world, in Mayan temples, in Egyptian tombs, but here in Ethiopia, the tradition never quite broke. It morphed, evolved, hid behind incense, smoke, and chants, but always remained. The churches became quiet calculators, sundials that whispered instead of ticking. Sister Alamichu lights a small candle and places it in a carved groove on the wall. Its flame dances along the corridor and lands, eventually, on the altar during certain months. She says, the flame lands outside the sanctuary. During others, it lands within. That's how we know when to sing the gospel of light. You wonder how many monks sat for hours, days, years adjusting that groove by centimeters until the candle told time correctly. No salaries, no fanfare, just a need to align their prayers with the path of the sun. Outside again, the light has shifted. It's afternoon now, and the groove on the outer wall has shifted its split beam. The cross is no longer bathed in light. The water, now shimmering, like a silver coin, reflects just enough sun to catch the eye of a nearby raven. It hops closer, then decides it's not worth the symbolism. You ask Sister Alamichu if the younger generation still uses these shadows. She smiles. They forget. Then they remember, usually when the rains come late. You nod. That tracks. It shows you one last detail, a carved cross on the ceiling that looks at first like any other. But as the sun moves across the opening above, the shadow of the cross slowly shifts, until, at exactly the right hour, it becomes a perfect X on the floor, not just decorative. It marks the day when fasting ends and celebration begins. You lie on a smooth patch of sun-warmed rock just outside the entrance. The bells begin to ring low and slow and slightly off-key. Not mechanical, just honest. And you realize something. The people here don't force time into boxes. They let it stretch, bend, wander. They listen to its shadow instead of its scream. And in that quiet, under that light, you find a kind of stillness you didn't know you needed. Later that evening, long after the last market goat has been walked home and the hills have folded into themselves like old blankets, you're led to a round house perched at the edge of the valley. Its walls are made of packed earth and straw, warm to the touch even after sundown. The thatched roof dips slightly in the middle, not from age, but from the many nights it has listened to chants rising beneath it. There's a fire inside, not large, just enough to paint soft orange shadows onto the curved walls. Around it sit 5 men, aged anywhere between 50 and you, VE-scene-empires-rise, each wrapped in linen shawls dyed by the same sun that now sleeps beyond the ridgeline. Their voices are low and overlapping, weaving a chant that feels more circular than linear. It doesn't lead anywhere, it just is. You're motioned to sit beside them. A cushion is pushed toward you, woven from dried grasses and softened by years of elbows, knees, and afternoon naps. You sink into it, grateful. Your host, a wiry man named Aba, hands you a steaming clay cup of coffee. No sugar, no milk, just the strong, smoky stuff roasted earlier that day over an open flame. 1 sip and your taste buds retreat into their shells. 2 sips and you start hearing colors. It's magnificent. These songs, Abi says, nodding toward the elders, are psalms, yes, but also, not just psalms. You tilt your head, intrigued, as one of the men reaches for a tightly bound scroll resting on a nearby shelf. The parchment crackles with age, the edges curled like old leaves. He unties it with slow fingers and spreads it open across his lap. The script is GS, ancient, looping, almost floral in its aesthetic. You can't read it, but you don't need to, because the man begins to sing the text aloud. His voice isn't particularly loud or polished, but it resonates in the chestures and his alike. Each word, drawn out with purpose, hangs in the air a moment before the next arrives. Abi leans close and whispers. This verse marks the first night of the barley planting moon. The next one, when to expect the river's shift. You blink. Aren't just religious texts. He says they're timekeepers. Astronomical, agricultural, practical. Each stanza is like a mnemonic riddle. Not just metaphor, but metaphor with mileage. You begin to understand. These chants were how time was memorized, how calendars were sung into daily life, how one could be illiterate but still know exactly when the moon would slip behind the hills, or when Sirius would kiss the morning sky. Modern scholars, naturally, have tried to codify this. They've traced symbols, charted lunar references, created spreadsheets, and drawn colorful diagrams. But what they can't seem to agree on is when exactly these hidden calendars began. Some claim these psalm chants are Christian adaptations of pre-Christian lunar poetry. Others argue they were imported from Egypt alongside early monasticism. A few romantics suggest they came from even older, now-forgotten traditions. Sets first in wind and firelight. The truth, as usual, probably, floats somewhere in between. But the villagers, they don't care who invented them. They just keep singing. Another scroll is open, this one thinner, with more diagrams than verses. It shows a line of stars, labeled not with names but with adjectives. Hesitant, sharp, drunk, Abi explains. These are nicknames for stellar behavior. When a star winks repeatedly over several nights, it's said to be drunk. When it rises later than expected, it's hesitant, and when it blazes too brightly without cause, sharp. The terms may sound poetic, but they're useful. They help remember patterns. Patterns help remember rain. Rain, of course, helps remember everything else. A woman enters the room, older, barefoot, with a stack of folded cloth on her head and a voice like smoked honey. She doesn't speak, just joins the chant mid-verse as if she never left. A harmony folds into the others seamlessly. You realize now that this isn't a performance, it's a practice, a ritual of remembering, and it's beautiful. One chant describes a serpent in the sky swallowing the bowl of light. You ask Abby what that could mean. He thinks for a second, then says, maybe an eclipse, or maybe a very bad lentil season. Both are valid. The group chuckles. You laugh too, but then you realize they're serious. For these villagers, metaphors don't detract from meaning, they carry it. These verses, part devotional, part cosmic diary, preserve the unrecorded history of wind, water, illness, hunger, relief, and celestial nudges. As the night deepens, the tempo of the chant slows. The kra comes out, a lyre-like instrument with 6 strings, each tuned to a different mood. It's not played for melody, but for motion. Each note sets the rhythm for the next breath, the next verse, the next memory. You're handed a piece of flatbread, soft, smoky, and still warm. It tastes like history, or maybe just butter. Either way, you're grateful. Abby tells you that in his youth he tried to write the Psalms down properly in neat columns, with lined margins and a French pen, but he failed. They're not meant to sit still, he admits. They had move, they bend. You forget one line, another returns in its place, like stars. That makes perfect sense. Lying back now, you glance through the small smoke hole in the ceiling. A few brave stars peek through, blinking at you like sleepy guardians. The fire has dulled to embers. The room hums with the afterglow of song. Number 1 claps, no one says amen. The chant simply fades like a tide, like memory, like sleep approaching. You pull your shawl closer, the scent of roasted grain and spiced wax clinging to its folds. The last psalm hangs in your ears, half sung, half dreamed. You don't need to understand it. You're part of it now. The scrolls are rolled back. The coffee is finished. The stars spin on. The wind shifts tonight. It's still gentle, nothing dramatic, but you notice it carries a different scent. Rain on dry bark, charcoal, something faintly medicinal. You follow its trail through narrow paths and stone terraces until you arrive at the edge of a small village square. There, seated beside a woven reed mat and a cluster of clay pots, are 3 women and an old man arguing about the sky. You sit quietly at first. Eavesdropping seems polite here. One of the women points upward, her bracelet jangling with every gesture. She's talking about a pair of stars that have moved closer together this week. Another woman disagrees. They've been close since the last wedding. She insists. The third woman, older, just laughs and says, they're not getting closer, you're just squinting more. Welcome to the world of the Bell-Wicked village diviners who interpret the stars, not through telescopes or textbooks, but through intuition, lineage, and long, quiet observation. Most of them are women. Most of them carry knives for slicing. Roots, not egos. And all of them will tell you, if you ask nicely, that the sky is just the start of the story. You're invited to sit with them. A cup of dark, spiced tella is passed your way, cloudy and earthy and probably strong enough to disinfect wounds. You drink anyway. It's warm, and the firelight turns everyone's eyes gold. The eldest woman introduces herself as Mezaret. Her hands are inkstanges. Been marking something on a hide scroll. You glance over, not words, but dots, tiny pinpricks made with a sharpened stick. You ask what they are. Last season's sky, she says. When the market flooded, each dot represents a star, or possibly an event, maybe both. She's been tracking correlations. When a certain cluster appears before midnight, goats give birth early. When another fades too quickly, someone's marriage dissolves before harvest. Historians still argue whether these forms of divination count as astronomy, astrology, or something else entirely. Some insist it's superstition. Others point to the uncanny accuracy of rainfall predictions tied to star positions. Still others perhaps wisely just call it sky wisdom and leave it at that. Meseret doesn't care what anyone calls it. She keeps marking her scroll. She offers to read your sky. You nod. She doesn't ask your birth date or star sign. Instead, she peers at your face in firelight, looks up at the stars, then asks if your dreams have felt shiny or wet. You hesitate, because honestly, you're not sure. She nods anyway. Wet dreams mean change is coming, she says. And before your brain can make a joke, she adds, but not always the kind you expect. You respect her too much to laugh. You just sip your tella and wait. The other women have begun debating something else, whether a particular star near the edge of the Milky Way blinked last night. One swears it pulsed 3 times. Another says no, it was just cloud cover. A third claims it blinked 4 times. But that's only if you count the first one before the chicken crowed. You ask how these blinking stars affect daily life. Floods, Meseret says, or weddings, or both. In the highlands, such things often go together. They explain that some stars speak louder than others. When one of them shifts out of place or disappears entirely, it means something will be misplaced down here too. A harvest lost, a child born early, a traveler delayed. It's not punishment, just alignment. You wonder aloud, do the stars cause these things, or just reflect them? Meseret smiles. Does the rooster cause the sun to rise? Touche. The conversation shifts naturally toward remedies. After all, if the stars warn you about something, you'd better be ready. They show you a basket of herbs sorted by moon phase, bitter ones for new moons, sweet for waning moons, sour for when Mars is grumpy. One bundle is tied with red thread in a chicken feather. That one, apparently, is for when a meteor lands within shouting distance of your house. You don't ask how often that happens. You don't want to know. As the fire dies down, one of the women reaches into her satchel and pulls out a palm-sized mirror. Not for vanity, for watching. She places it on the ground and tilts it toward the sky. In its surface, you see a reflection of the stars not just above, but beneath you now. She uses the mirror to track their movement in reverse, a technique passed down from an aunt who once claimed to have predicted a drought using nothing but mirror flashes and goat hiccups. You lie back on the mat, head cradled in a rolled shawl, and stare into the actual sky. The stars twinkle, steady and unsupervised. There's no formal constellation map here. No lines drawn, just knowledge passed by women who've watched these lights shift with seasons, politics, love stories, and grain yields. You ask if there's a star that brings good luck. They laugh in unison. They all do, one says, if you're polite. And with that, the conversation turns to the merits of cooking lentils under a waxing moon. It makes them sweeter. And the dangers of arguing with a neighbor while the sky is cloudy. You'll never win. You begin to drift. The women are still talking, their voices low and soft, more music than meaning now. The mirror catches a final flicker of starlight before the fire burns out, and somewhere in the sky above, or maybe inside your chest, a blinking star goes quiet. You're walking again, this time along a stretch of dry hillside, where the path crunches with bits of ochre stone and stubborn weeds that refuse to grow anywhere else. The sky above is pale blue, but not empty. Somewhere behind the haze of afternoon light, the stars are still watching, quietly biding their time. You're headed to what once was a royal scriptorium, or, as your guide Germa puts it, the place where people argued with the moon using ink. It's not a grand structure, no towering columns, no sweeping marble, just a modest row of flat-roofed stone buildings, half collapsed, half preserved by sheer stubbornness and the dry highland air. Germa is a thin man in his 70s, with papyrus-colored skin and fingers perpetually stained with blue ink. He doesn't walk so much as drift, like someone who's never quite left a conversation from last year. He carries a worn shoulder bag stuffed with folded scrolls, dried leaves, and a slightly crushed fig. Before we had printing, he says, gesturing at the stone walls, we had remembering. You follow him into the shade of the largest room. The walls are bare now, but once they were lined with carved shelves, lined again with scrolls, some from Egypt, others copied and recopied by candlelight right here in these rooms. He pulls out a thin piece of leather parchment and lays it across a stone slab. This one, he says, is a calendar. But not just for days, for moods. You lean in. The script is GS, but with strange annotations, little marks that look like sideways eyes, sunbursts, and a symbol that could easily be a very angry chicken. These, he explains, came from Egypt originally. Calendars carved in temples, mapped to the Nile floods. But once they arrived here, how do you edited them? You smile. Of course they did. In ancient Egypt, calendars were deeply intertwined with astronomy. The rising of Sirius marked the start of the flood season. Solar deities regulated the workday. Priests observed the heavens to align earthly rituals with celestial movements. But Ethiopia took those bones and built new flesh, 13 months instead of 12, a clock that starts at dawn. A whole culture of listening instead of commanding. You ask how these old Egyptian ideas made their way into the highlands. Germa shrugs. Traders, scribes, monks, one papyrus at a time. He hands you a worn page that lists the names of days, not by number, by character. One is the gentle ox, another the eye that forgets, a third, the coughing hour. You ask if these are metaphors or actual star positions. Yes, he says. You're beginning to notice a pattern with people like Germa. They resist binaries. They treat science and poetry not as opposites, but dance partners. The stars are not just light in the sky. They're timekeepers, gossipers, therapists, sometimes exasperated uncles. They guide the harvest, signal feast days, and occasionally warn of poor decisions in marriage or lentil pricing. He shows you a chart etched into stone, a kind of sundial, but not circular. It's shaped like a long arc with markers for different constellations. The sun's shadow travels along it over the course of months, not hours. And at one end is a small, carved niche. When the shadow touches this spot, Germa says, you must begin preparing the grain stores. That's when Sirius stirs, even if you don't see her yet. Historians still argue whether this long-scale sundial is original to Axum or borrowed from Egyptian water clock philosophy, but either way, it works. You touch the niche. It's smooth from centuries of fingers doing exactly what you just did. Outside in the courtyard, Germa points to a long stone obelisk lying on its side, half buried in weeds. That one fell before I was born, he says, but its shadow still arrives on time. You lie down on a flat patch of grass nearby and watch the sun angle down across the valley. The light spills lazily over the hills, casting long golden arms that touch everything in reach. A pot, a goat, a child's foot, the top of your forehead. You close your eyes and let it rest there. Germa sits beside you and opens another scroll. This one is a hymn, he says, but also a planting chart. He begins to sing not loudly, but with the rhythm of someone stirring porridge. The words glide by, soft and low. Asterisk asterisk when the blue star sleeps behind the tamarind. Wake the root. When the lion star licks the east, wet the fields. When the cold star weeps before dawn, store the salt. Asterisk asterisk you open your eyes. He's still singing, and you're still not sure where science ends and song begins. You're not even sure it matters anymore. These ancient calendars, whether Egyptian in origin or Highland-born, were never meant to be rigid. They were guides, companions, reminders that time moves in rhythms, not checklists. Before you leave, Germa shows you a final piece, a square wooden box with small holes drilled into its lid. He opens it to reveal a shallow bowl inside, stained from use. Water clock, he says. You've seen diagrams of these. Fill with water, let it drip through, and when the level reaches a certain mark, a bell rings, or in this case, a rooster outside starts yelling. It's not about precision, Germa says. It's about paying attention. And just like that, the sun begins to dip behind the far ridge. The long shadow of the broken obelisk creeps forward, stretching across the grass, touching the edge of the sundial. One more minute and it'll hit the niche. You watch in silence. And as it does, you feel it not the hour, but the moment, a breath, a blink, a quiet agreement between earth and sky. By now, time has softened. Days melt into nights. Footsteps blend into chants. Your sense of direction, irrelevant. You're no longer walking towards something, you're simply following where the quiet takes you. Tonight, the quiet takes you somewhere unexpected. A wide open field that seems, at first, like nothing special. No buildings, no bells, no bundles of dried herbs or ancient scrolls to pore over. Just dry grass, a few thorny bushes, and a tall, leaning stone stabbed into the earth. Like the sky left a bookmark. You're here to meet the monolith. Your guide is a teenage shepherd named Kadane, who seems wholly unimpressed by everything you've found miraculous so far. He carries a sling over one shoulder, a wooden flute in the other, and a facial expression permanently hovering somewhere between amusement and sleepy boredom. That's it, he says, pointing. You squint. At first glance, it's just a large chunk of basalt, weathered, cracked, covered in lichen. But as you approach, you begin to notice the details. The surface isn't just rough, it's carved, not with words or images, but with long, deep grooves and angled cuts that catch the fading light in strange, deliberate ways. Kadane doesn't give you a lecture, he just kicks at the ground, then plops down cross-legged and begins to unwrap a small pouch of roasted chickpeas. It's for the equinox, he says, through a mouthful of crunch. You sit beside him, brushing the dust off your knees. The stone stands perhaps 12 meters tall, dark against the last blush of twilight. It leans ever so slightly to the west, as if it's been watching sunsets longer than anyone alive can remember. No one knows who put it here, Kadane says, but we know what it does. And what it does apparently is tell the sky when to breathe twice a year. At the spring and autumn equinox, the sun aligns perfectly with a narrow groove carved vertically into the stone. The light travels through the groove and hits a small hollow etched into the ground about 5 meters in front of the monolith. It only lands there on 2 days, Kadane says. Exactly 2. And if you see it happen, you're supposed to stop talking and just listen. You glance around. There's no one else here. No audience, no priests, no tourists. Just this boy, his sling, and a rock that's older than most. Alphabets. Historians have debated this monolith for over a century. Some believe it's part of a larger, now vanished astronomical site. Others think it marked seasonal migration routes. Still others have no idea and choose to quietly sip tea. Rather than pretend, the stone offers no answers. Only alignment. You lie back in the grass, the earth still warm from the day. The stars are beginning to emerge, first timid, then bolder. Kadane begins to play his flute, the notes loose and lilting. It's not a song, exactly. More like a conversation, between the wind and the sky. With his breath acting as a translator, he tells you his grandfather used to bring him here when he was little. We would wait for the sun to hit the notch, then he would tell a story, or fall asleep, depends. You ask what kind of stories. Kadane shrugs. Once he said the stone is the spine of a giant who sleeps beneath the mountain. Another time he said it's a broken tooth left behind by the moon. It changes. You smile. Stories always do. But the one thing that doesn't change is the groove. Even now, in this dim light, you can see how precise it is, too straight to be accidental, too stubborn to have eroded naturally. It speaks of intention, of someone, long ago, carving time into rock because paper would never last. You ask if anyone still uses it to mark the equinox. Some farmers do, Kidane says. Some just like to visit. When the light lands right, it feels like the world agrees with itself. That's not scientific. But it is perfect. As the stars bloom overhead, you watch the stone in silence. It casts a long shadow behind it, growing thinner as the moon rises. Somewhere in the distance an owl calls once, then falls silent. Even the night animals seem to respect the monolith. You ask Kidane if people ever tried to move the stone or study it more closely. Once, he says, a man from Europe brought string and a camera. He measured everything. Then he left and said it was interesting. You both chuckle. That's probably the best anyone could say. Eventually Kidane dozes off, his head resting against his sling pouch. The flute slips from his fingers and lands in the grass. You pull your shawl tighter and lie still, feeling the earth's quiet heartbeat beneath you, and in the darkness, you begin to notice something strange. The stars above seem to tilt slightly, aligning just barely with the vertical groove on the stone. You can't prove it, but you don't need to. You understand now that this monolith isn't just a timekeeper. It's a participant. It doesn't tell you what time it is. It asks if you're ready to meet it, and you are. The sky deepens. The grass breathes. The stone leans, and for a moment, just one soft, wordless moment, you feel balanced too. It's morning again, or at least that in-between moment when the sky hasn't decided whether it's still night or politely edging into day. The stars are slipping away one by one, embarrassed perhaps to have been caught loitering. You rise, slowly, limbs stiff from the ground, and Kidane, already awake, greets you with the kind of nod that says, I definitely didn't drool in my sleep, and if I did, don't mention it. He offers you half a roasted corn cob wrapped in leaves. You chew in silence as the sun begins its lazy ascent behind the ridge. The monolith stands quietly behind you, content with whatever message it sent last night. Or maybe it's just stretching you. Next stop is a town nestled deeper in the highlands, a place where history got a little nervous and tried to rewrite itself. You arrive around mid-morning when the roads are just starting to dust themselves off and everyone still pretending to be busier than they actually are, waiting for you in a small courtyard surrounded by flowering vines and chickens with deeply personal agendas is a priest with a surprising expression, suspicion mixed with hospitality. His name is Abatekel. He greets you with a handshake and a blessing, then proceeds to tell you politely, but firmly, that the stars have caused a lot of trouble around here. You've reached 17th century Ethiopia, or rather, you've reached the hangover from it during the 1600s. Jesuit missionaries arrived in Ethiopia with good intentions, bad maps, and an overwhelming need to tidy things up. They brought books, theology, liturgical habits, and a distinct discomfort with anything involving astrology, dreams, or celestial pattern sniffing. Abatekel leads you into the small chapel, sunlight streaking through gaps in the walls. He points toward a half-faded mural high on the ceiling there. Among angels and clouds is a curious figure holding a compass and a star map. Not a saint, not a monk, an astronomer. Before the Jesuits came, he says, we used to paint them, too. You blink yes, he continues. The sky was part of the church. You could speak of Orion and Archangel Michael in the same breath, but then he waves vaguely in the air, as though gesturing at a century of uncomfortable edits. The missionaries didn't like the blending. They preferred clean categories, sacred versus secular, scripture versus superstition. And so, across the highlands, murals were whitewashed, scrolls were quietly boxed up, and any Dabtara who charted the stars was gently reminded to maybe focus more on psalms and less on planetary retrograde. Historians still debate just how harsh the crackdown was. Some sources speak of outright bans, others hint that the old knowledge simply went underground, sung in lullabies, whispered in market chants, preserved in the folds of folk medicine. You ask Abatekel if anything was lost. He smiles, eyes crinkling. Nothing ever gets lost, he says. It just waits to be useful again. If you follow him into the vestry, where a few ancient manuscripts are kept in drawers lined with cotton, he pulls one out carefully and opens it to reveal a faded diagram of stars arranged in spiral form. In the margins, someone has written a prayer, but not a standard one. You read, when the moon nods twice, do not light the fire. The wind is listening. You ask if it's astrological. No, he says, it's liturgical, just in a different language. The manuscript is one of many from the era just before the Jesuits arrived, when Ethiopian scholars were blending religious thought with skywatching seamlessly. The stars weren't divine in the Western sense, but they were part of the divine rhythm. They were signs not of fate, but of alignment. When things above flowed smoothly, so did things below. And if they didn't, you fasted, you lit a candle. You maybe didn't build a new fence that week. The priests of that age, especially those trained in the northern monasteries, were expert navigators of both scripture and starlight. They knew when to chant Psalm 67 to align with the full moon, or when to pair the Gospel of Matthew with the rise of Mars to encourage courage in children. These weren't rules, they were resonances. But when the Jesuits came, they asked for clear lines, and in drawing them, much of that blend was scraped away. Still, Abatekel shows you something unexpected, a small painted panel from the 18th century. hidden behind an altar cloth. It depicts a monk standing beneath a swirling sky, his hands raised not in warning, but in welcome. Above him, 3 stars are marked with gold leaf. Some of us never stopped painting them, he says. You step back outside, the air cooler now. Children run across the courtyard with sticks and sandals flying. One of them stops to pick up a pebble and toss it skyward, as though trying to knock on heaven's door just for fun. You ask the priest if he believes the stars can still teach us something. He looks at you as if the question itself is backwards. They never stopped teaching, he says. We just forget to look up. And then, as if to prove his point, he raises his eyes toward the sun now climbing steadily and recites something so soft, so melodic you can barely catch the words. Asterisk, asterisk, when the gold fire crosses the black stone. Speak less, the air is learning. Asterisk, asterisk, you sit on a low bench under the vines, heart full of whispers, ears full of unsaid verses, and somewhere overhead, the morning sky begins to forget the argument between stars and scripture. Tonight you find yourself in a round house at the edge of a small village where the night arrives slowly, as if pausing to dust its feet on the doorstep. The walls are thick with packed earth, smelling faintly of old incense and new onions. There's no furniture, really just mats on the ground, a fire pit in the center, and a woman who looks like she's been arguing with time and winning. Her name is Waziro Mahi. Locals call her the Moon Sleeper, though no one will tell you why exactly. She's a healer. Yes, but not the kind who prescribes pills or frowns at clipboards. Her medicine is older than clipboards, older than paper. Maybe. She waves you in with a hand dusted in powdered bark and says, sit. You look like someone whose dreams are stuck in the wrong drawer. You sit. The fire crackles softly. There's something bubbling on the hearth in a white clay patar thick soup that smells like lentils, cardamom, and possibly sarcasm. Around the room, you see bundles of dried herbs hanging like sleeping bats. Some are labeled with symbols, stars, moons, tiny stick figures dancing or weeping. It's not clear if the drawings are instructional or simply mood indicators. Dinner. First, she says, ladling soup into a bowl carved from calabash, then stargazing. Not the kind with your eyes, the kind with your bones. You take the bowl. The soup is hot and oddly sweet, comforting, like a memory of being hugged by someone who always smelled faintly of soup. You ask what's in it. Lentils, root bark, a sprig of don't ask. She smiles. Also a leaf that only listens when it rains. You nod. Naturally. As you eat, Waziro Mahi begins her evening routine, not unlike a ritual, though she'd probably deny calling it that. She moves with practiced ease, sorting dried leaves into clay jars, stirring something in a mortar, humming a tune that never quite repeats itself. The rhythm of her actions is hypnotic. You ask her about the stars, not the ones in the sky but the ones painted on the wall above the hearth. She glances up. Those aren't stars. Those are reminders of when to plant, when to stay quiet, when to let the soup simmer longer because Mars is irritated. She points to one symbol, a crescent with 3 dots above it. That one means tonight is a listening night. No plans, no decisions, just steam and breath. You ask if this is astrology. She snorts. Astrology is when people ask the stars for favors. This is different. We listen to them complain, then adjust our behavior accordingly. You finish your soup. It's left a warmth in your chest that has nothing to do with temperature. Where's Mahi pours you a second bowl without asking. You're not ready to sleep yet, she says. You ask how she became a healer. My grandmother taught me, she replies. She said every dream is a question, and every stomachache is a story. With a bad beginning, she walks over to a small wooden box and opens it slowly. Inside are carved stones, each etched with its own symbol. Spirals, arrows, crooked stars. She spills them gently onto a woven mat and examines the way they land. Someone around you is asking the same question over and over. You nod. Probably you. She picks up one of the stones, a square one, marked with a wave and a sleeping eye, and hands it to you. Put this under your pillow. It reminds your dreams to be more useful. Outside, you hear a soft hoot from an owl, answered by the distant bark of a dog who is clearly overqualified for the conversation. The stars have begun their nightly shift. You can't see them from inside, but you feel them pressing gently at the corners of the house, where Zero Mahi begins boiling water for tea. Tonight is good for tea, she says. Venus is watching, and she likes hot drinks. You sip slowly from the cup she gives you. The tea is strong, floral, with a hint of bitterness that settles just behind your eyes. You ask if the stars ever lie. No, she says, but sometimes we hear what we want, not what they're actually saying. She leans back against the wall, wrapped in a shawl that seems to contain several unrelated weather patterns. Her eyes close halfway. The stars speak in weather, in stomachs, in forgotten names. She tells you about the time her cousin tried to sell onions during a moonless week and ended up cursed with hiccups that lasted until the next lunar cycle. The stars didn't punish him, she says. They just didn't help him lie. You stretch out on a mat she's prepared, padded with something soft and smelling of crushed mint. She places a bundle of herbs near your head. For recall, in case you dream something important and need to bring it back. You close your eyes. The room is quiet now, except for the rustling of the fire and the distant murmur of someone singing to their goats. You feel yourself slipping not into sleep, exactly, but into the space where sleep waits patiently for your arrival before you drift. Where Ziromahi speaks one last time, barely above a whisper. When the moon is full and the dreams are restless, boil lentils. Let them listen, don't ask them anything. Just feed them, they'll answer when they're ready. You smile, eyes closed. The stars above don't blink, they breathe, and beneath them, soup still simmers in a pot that never quite empties. The road curves like a lazy river as you climb higher into the northern highlands, higher than trees. Higher than roads that remember their purpose. Higher than the reach of most maps. The wind here moves differently. It doesn't pass you by, it wraps itself around you, tasting your breath and testing your intent. This is where the stars come closest, where stories land, and where one very specific piece of sky decided, long ago, to fall. You arrive at dusk in a small village nestled against a rocky slope, where houses cluster like a congregation of half-listening elders. Everything here feels like it's been gently waiting for you, not impatiently, just patiently, like a warm seat by a fire that no one thought to reserve. Because they always knew you'd sit there. You're welcomed by a woman named Hirat, whose handshake is firm, eyes bright, and laugh ready for deployment. She ushers you into her courtyard, where a pot of Ethiopian coffee is already bubbling on hot coals. She pours you a cup before you ask. This is not hospitality, this is ritual. You came on a lucky night, she says. The sky is in a talking mood. You're here to learn about the media. Not just any media, their media. It fell here generations ago, so long back that no one agrees on the date. But everyone agrees on the sound, a howl like a lion made of fire. It arrived just before a drought ended, just after a strange fever lifted, just around the time a baby was born with silver in his hair. No one can say exactly what it changed, but everything changed, and so they built it a house, not a temple, not a shrine, just a small, round stone hut with a thatched roof and a doorway shaped like an open hand. Inside sits the stone itself, black, glossy, slightly dented, about the size of a large cooking pot. It doesn't glow, it doesn't pulse, but it never really gets cold, even in winter. And when the moon is full, some say it hums. Here it walks with you there after your third cup of coffee. Past houses and sleepy goats and elders who nod at you, with the approval normally reserved for someone who brings good rain. The meteor hut is set apart slightly, flanked by 2 wild fig trees that fruit only when no one is watching. Inside the hut, it's quiet, the kind of quiet that listens. The meteor sits on a bed of woven straw mats, surrounded by small offerings of herbs, polished stones, copper coins, and dried flowers arranged in spirals. There's no altar, but the stone is the altar. Here it kneels beside it and places a fresh bundle of roasted barley at its base. We feed it, she says. It's polite. You don't let guests starve. You ask what kind of guest it is. She smiles. The kind that arrives without luggage but with a lot of questions. You reach out a hand. She stops you, not with fear, but with etiquette. Only after you speak, she says. You close your eyes and say something, not in words exactly, but in feeling. Gratitude, curiosity, a small apology for not bringing anything but your ears. Then she nods, and you place your palm on the stone. It's warm, not like sunlight or fire, more like breath. You don't hear voices, but you hear. Waiting, the village treats the meteor, not as a god but as a relative, a cousin from far away, a celestial house guest who never left. When crops fail, they ask it why. When babies cry too long, they bring honey near its base. When someone has a dream they can't explain, they sit quietly with the stone until it helps them forget or remember. Historians call this folklore. The villagers call it memory. There's a logbook of sorts passed down for with dreams, visions, predictions, and weather patterns recorded alongside sightings of strange lights in the sky. Some match meteor showers known globally, others don't. Single quotes. T.1 entry, dated only as the night the cows hit, describes a bluish flame that hovered silently over the eastern field, then sank into the earth and disappeared. That same week, the meteor was said to be warm enough to boil milk without fire. You raise an eyebrow. Here it shrugs. Some stories are just stories, others grow teeth. You return to the village square after dark. The stars are thick overhead, layered like tapestries. Everyone gathers in the center of the square, not for ceremony, but for a habit so old it forgot how to be unusual. They drink coffee, tell stories, and watch the sky. One star brighter than the rest. Low in the western sky draws murmurs. The children call it the sky's eye. The elders call it the messenger. It's appeared just before every major event. The village remembers floods, weddings, mysterious dreams, crop surges. No one predicts anything based on it. They simply pay attention. You sip your coffee slowly, tasting cardamom and wood smoke, and something else. Maybe history, maybe night itself. Here it leans close. You don't need to understand it, she says. Just promise to look up sometimes. You nod. And when the stars blink as if winking, you smile, and wink back, because maybe that's all they want. You wake to the sound of grain being ground stone against stone, rhythmic, patient. The The kind of sound that's been heard exactly this way for 1,000 years. The scent of roasted barley and wood smoke floats into your room. Outside the sky, that hasn't decided what shade of blue it wants to wear yet. You're still in the highlands, but today you're headed even further off the map, not to a monastery or shrine, not to the house of a healer or a hut where meteors sleep in peace. No, today, you're walking into a field, a very normal field, filled with very normal farmers who, very unusually, know how to read the Milky Way like a book. You meet your guide at sunrise. His name is Lemma, and he looks like he's been awake since before coffee was invented. He carries a hoe over one shoulder, a sheaf of dried grass under one arm, and a smile that says he already knows you'll step in something unfortunate before the day is out. This way, he says, leading you down a narrow path lined with thick brush and tiny yellow flowers. The walk is longer than you expected through steep gullies, past a herd of sheep that seems to judge you silently. Across a stream you ford on a log that is, by every definition, not up to code. But when you arrive, the view makes sense of everything. Rolling fields of dark soil, bordered by ancient stone walls, and above it all, the entire sky stretched wide and clear like a freshly unrolled scroll. These are the fields where the stars speak, Lemma says, dropping the grass and starting to rake it into neat bundles. You ask what that means. It means, he says, we don't plant when we want to. We plant when the sky tells us. And no, he doesn't mean using a lunar calendar, though that's part of it. He means the Milky Way. He gestures upward, not at a specific star, but at the whole swath of stars overhead, the pale trail of light that crosses the night sky like a river made of memory. For centuries, farmers like Lemma have used the Milky Way to guide agricultural rhythms: when to till, when to sow, when to harvest, and when to leave the land alone. The river in the sky, he calls it, sometimes straight, sometimes bent. When it bends, we wait. When it straightens, we move. He describes it in practical terms. The angle of the Milky Way in relation to the horizon shifts across seasons. When it tilts northward after sunset, it's time to plant barley. When it rises vertically in the early morning, teff should already be in the ground. And when it disappears completely, usually in late summer, it means pause, rest, watch the goats. Try not to argue with your neighbor. You ask how he learned. All this, my mother, he says. She could find Saturn with her eyes closed. She used to say the stars were stubborn, but they never lied. He pauses to sip from a jug of water, then adds, except when they flirt. Then they're very confusing. As you walk with him through the fields, he points to spots in the soil where different crops will grow, each chosen according to not just what the land needs, but what the sky offers. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were and how scientific they might have been. Some dismiss them as mere folklore, others recognize them as a form of empirical observation, passed through generations. Lemma shrugs at the debate. They can call it what they want, he says. The beans still grow. At night, he invites you to sit with his family by a small fire near the edge of the field. As the sun dips, the sky comes alive. First, a few stars, then hundreds, then thousands, and then the Milky Way itself, arching overhead in a soft blaze of scattered light. Everyone quiets. His daughter, maybe 8 years old, points up it straight to night. She whispers. Lemma nods. The earth agrees. You ask if she's learning to read the sky too. Of course, he says. She knows which stars mean rain, which ones mean don't marry that boy from the next village. She grins. The family begins telling stories, some about planting, some about rain, some about a time when the Milky Way curved in the wrong direction and all the cows started sleeping backwards. No one knows if that part is true, but no one interrupts it either. You notice that each story, no matter how lighthearted, carries a small instruction, a hint, a lesson. Watch the soil. Don't ignore the wind when the stars cluster in a triangle. Don't dig new fences. You ask Lemma if he's ever taught this to outsiders. Sometimes, he says, but many don't listen. They want the stars to tell them secrets. We just ask them to tell us what time it is. The fire burns lower. The sky darkens deeper. The Milky Way gleams overhead, unmistakable and utterly indifferent, and yet you feel watched. Not in a threatening way. In the way a teacher watches a student who's finally stopped talking and started listening. You lie back in the field, head resting on bundled straw, earth warm beneath you, stars waiting above, and in that silence you hear it, not words, just rhythm, the rhythm of seasons, of soil, of stars that don't demand belief, only attention. And maybe, just maybe, a little humility. You find yourself walking again, this time, with a stick in one hand and a lengthening shadow at your heels. The sun is easing toward the horizon, doing that soft golden thing it does when it's trying to make everything look meaningful. The ground crunches beneath your feet, loose gravel, broken leaves, bits of centuries. You're not headed to a village, not to a monastery, and not even to a particularly sacred hill. No, today, you're walking into one of the most ancient technologies known to humankind, a patch of dirt with a stick in it. That's right, a sundial, but not the grand marble kind engraved with Latin quotes and Roman numerals, no sculpted lions, no brass, no mons. This sundial is humble. It belongs to the fields, to the hands that dig, to the eyes that squint at shadows and decide when it's time to turn the soil, or call the kids in for lunch. You're met by a man named Johannes. He's in his 60s, though his skin makes no promises about age, and his teeth are white enough to make you blink. He waves from beside a low stone wall and greets you with a question instead of a welcome. What time is it? You look at your watch. He snorts. No, no. What does your shadow say? You glance down. Your shadow stretches diagonally across the path, long and pointed like it's trying to sneak off on its own. Johannes shakes his head late afternoon tired. He says, if you were a goat, this is the hour you start pretending you're not hungry just to be dramatic. He chuckles and gestures you into his compound, a tidy rectangle of stone and grass with a small circular space at its center. In the middle, a wooden pole stuck into the ground. Around it, rings of pebbles, some larger than others, some painted, all arranged with maddening precision. It doesn't look like much, but it tells time. He calls it a keen zagude, a simple sundial used in his family for generations. Not just to tell time and hours, but to tell seasons and breath. You ask him how it works. You see that long stone over there? He says, pointing to a flat rock on the southern edge. When the shadow touches that, it's the season for digging. When it touches that white stone, it's time to dry turf. And when it doesn't touch anything at all, he grins. You take a nap. You sit beside the sundial as Johannes begins explaining what looks, at first glance, like a child's art project. There's a method here. Each pebble represents not a number, but a task. Not a minute, but a mood. One stone is for brewing, tell of the local beer. One marks the right time to collect firewood so it doesn't crackle too loud and wake the ancestors. Another, a triangular one, is used to tell when it's time to stop arguing and just say yes to whatever your spouse wants. He laughs as he says this. You suspect that one was his wife's idea. You begin to realize this isn't a tool for measuring time. It's a map of living inside it. Historians still argue about the sophistication of African timekeeping methods. Many focused on written calendars, ignoring the embodied systems, how people moved when they paused, how labor rhythms matched the sun's path. But here, with this simple stick and ring of stones, Johannes is showing you something deeper. Not just how to tell time, but how to respect it as the sun lowers. The shadow lengthens and touches a reddish stone. Johannes raises an eyebrow. Time for coffee, he says. You're led to the back of the compound where his daughter is, already roasting beans in a shallow pan over coals. The aroma is instantaneous, invading your lungs and deciding to redecorate. As she grinds the beans and boils the water, Johannes explains how their family uses the sundial not just for farming or chores but for feelings. When the shadow touches here, he says, pointing to a small smooth stone, it's the best time to ask forgiveness. You pause. From who? He shrugs. Anyone, yourself even. You sip coffee from a tiny ceramic cup, watching the shadow shift with each passing minute. There's something oddly meditative about it. You're not watching time pass, you're watching it arrive. Each change in the shadow's position is like a soft knock at the door. Another moment, another chance. Later, Johannes leads you back to the sundial and teaches you how to read it the old way. First, he says, stand straight, let your shadow fall. Now measure the tip with your foot. You do now, he says. Ask yourself what part of the day you feel like. You blink. What? He smiles. That's how we knew when to rest. If your shadow feels longer than you are, go lie down. If it's shorter, get to work. You laugh. It makes perfect sense. You begin to understand that time here isn't mechanical. It doesn't tick. It leans. It tilts. It hums. The sundial isn't about precision, it's about permission. Permission to move with the light, not in spite of it. As the sun dips lower, the shadow stretches again, now pointing toward a curved line of stone shaped like a crescent. Johannes points. That's the time for telling stories. So he tells you one about his grandfather, who once used the sundial to win a bet about whether it would rain before the new moon. He won the bet. It didn't rain, but he forgot he'd bet with his wife. So he slept outside, under the sundial, all night. She said the shadow was more honest than he was. Johannes chuckles. You sit together in the warm twilight, two silhouettes, slowly merging with the ground, and you think, time, after all, isn't something to chase. It's something to accompany, like a slow friend who walks beside you, not ahead. And maybe, just maybe, a stick in the ground and a few stones are all you ever needed to remember that. You arrive at twilight, when the sky starts to look like it's been stirred gently with a spoon dipped in indigo. A few stars are already peeking out early and slightly smug about it. The wind here carries something different, not just dust or chill, but memory. Old, quiet memory. This is a small village, more of a cluster of homes than a mapped settlement. And you're here because of what they're famous for, even though no one really says they're famous. In fact, when asked, most locals will look around, shrug, and say, we just listen to dreams. They don't mean they interpret dreams. That would be too limiting, too clinical. Here, dreams are treated like guests. You don't rush them. You don't dissect them. You welcome them, give them somewhere to rest, and let them speak only when they're ready. Your host tonight is a woman named Mibrat. She's 78, but her eyes are sharp in the way only someone who's made peace with both sunrise and disappointment can manage. She meets you at the gate of her compound with a walking stick and a bundle of herbs slung over her shoulder like a soft, fragrant axe. "You've brought dust," she says, brushing imaginary flecks off your sleeve. "Come in, we'll give it somewhere to settle." Her house is cool, round, and full of shadows that feel like they belong. Woven baskets line the walls, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, small ones, large ones, square, oval, with lids or without. Each is hand-stitched, decorated not with names but with symbols: stars, fish, trees with upside-down roots, figures curled like commas. "These are where we keep the dreams," she says, matter-of-factly, "not the bad ones, not the ones that bite, but the ones that whisper." You sit cross-legged on a floor mat while she pours you tea from a kettle shaped like a gourd. The tea smells like cloves and something slightly medicinal, not unpleasant, just honest. You ask her how this tradition started. She shrugs. "The stars kept talking, and people kept forgetting. So we decided to remember differently." She gestures to a particularly large basket with a lid wrapped in blue thread. "This one holds dreams about water. Any water. Lakes, tears, wells, floods. It's very full." Next to it is a smaller basket marked with 3 red dots. "This one's for repeating dreams. Things that come back wearing different shoes." You raise an eyebrow. She smiles. "You'd be surprised how often dreams just want to try on new footwear." For generations, villagers here have brought their dreams to women like me, Brit. Not every dream, just the ones that linger. They share them not in public, but in hushed tones over warm drinks, while chickens grumble sleepily outside. The dream listeners, usually elders, would memorize the content, classify it by tone and image, and choose a basket. No dream is written down. Everything is stored through memory and symbolic embroidery. She pulls out a flat square of cloth stitched with gentle swirls and dark thread. "This one is from a woman who dreamed she was a comet, but she kept forgetting why she was in the sky." You study the fabric. No words, just shapes. But somehow it makes sense. There's one basket set slightly apart from the rest, half tucked beneath a low bench. "That one's for dreams that came true," Mibrat says, softly. "We don't open it often. It makes the air feel strange." She explains that the act of storing dreams isn't just about preservation, it's about pattern. Every few months, the dream holders meet, compare notes, and look for recurrences. When multiple people dream of a bird with no eyes, or a well that speaks, or teeth scattered on a road, they pay attention. Historians still debate whether this tradition qualifies as an informal method of cultural forecasting or just very poetic sociology. The villagers don't care what it's called. They call it listening. You ask how she remembers all the dreams. "Isn't it overwhelming?" She taps her temple. "Memory is like a soup. You don't hold every vegetable, but you remember the flavor." As the night deepens, more villagers arrive, quietly, mostly women, some children, a few men who look like they've just finished arguing with a stubborn goat. They sit in a loose circle, sip tea, and begin to speak in turns. One woman talks about dreaming of a house that moves every time she tries to enter. A young boy describes a dream where his shadow went to school but he stayed home. Each story is met with nods, not questions. No one interrupts, no one analyzes, but when a dream rings familiar whisper from someone else's night, they note it silently, by touching a particular bead on a bracelet, or placing a pebble beside their knee. You're invited to share. You pause. You remember last week's dream, a river full of clocks, each ticking in a different language. You tell them, they listen. Mibrat nods, reaches for a tiny embroidered square, and sets it aside with 3 others that, apparently, belong to the same stream of thought. "You're not the only one," she murmurs. At the end of the gathering, a few select dreams are honored with a new stitch. Mibrat adds a single golden thread to a circle of dark fabric and tucks it into a basket marked with a moon and 2 dots. "That one might be important in a few years," he says. "Or not." You lie down that night in a corner of her home, wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of ginger and cedar. The stars outside are bright but not loud. They don't demand your attention. They just keep being there. You close your eyes. Somewhere nearby, a basket is breathing quietly, and inside it, someone's dream is curling into sleep. The morning mist clings to your sleeves like a secret. It's quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but full, like the earth is holding its breath, or maybe just listening closely. The stars have gone, but you still feel them go, of light just beyond the blue. They've followed you this far. They're not leaving just yet. You rise slowly, brushing dust from your knees, and gather your things. Mibrat is already awake, sipping from a small ceramic cup, her eyes sharp, an unreadable glance up at you over the rim. "You slept," she says. "It's not a question." You nod. "And you dreamed," she adds, standing slowly. The cloth moved. You glance at the dream cloth she gave you last night. It's been folded neatly beside your head, but now it's different. The threads feel warmer, looser, like they've been rearranged ever so slightly, by fingers that don't mind being unseen. "You're ready," Mibrat says. "Now we walk to the place where the stars return what they borrowed." You ask her what that means. She only smiles. "You'll see. The path winds upward, slowly. Not steep, not demanding, just steady. You walk together through a forest that feels like it was painted in layers first, the trees, then the wind, then the silence. There are no birds this morning, no insects, only the sound of your footsteps, and the faint creak of her walking, stick tapping ancient rhythms into the soil. As you reach the crest of a low hill, the landscape opens suddenly, breathtakingly. Before you lies a vast open plain, dotted with standing stones. Dozens of them, maybe more. Some are tall and narrow, others squat and wide. All are worn smooth by wind and time. This is the circle of whisperers, Mibrat says. You step forward, almost afraid to breathe too loudly. The stones aren't arranged in a perfect ring. They're scattered just enough to make it feel organic, accidental, but when you stand in the center, you feel it. The weight, the geometry of silence. Each stone listens, she explains. Each one holds a story, or a question, or a dream too large to carry. She walks among them slowly, brushing her fingers across their surfaces. Some are cool. Others somehow still warm from sunlight that left hours ago. You don't ask the stones anything, she says. You simply stand and wait. So do you close your eyes? You breathe in and you wait. At first there's nothing, just the wind, then a flicker, not sound, not exactly memory, but presence, as if something old and gentle has noticed you and isn't quite sure if it wants to be seen. You open your eyes, a single stone shorter than the others, with a faint spiral etched into it seems to glow in the corner of your vision. Mibrat nods. That one remembers you. You kneel beside it, place your hand on its surface. It's cool, rough and steady, like a heartbeat that never needed a body. She sits beside you and begins to hum. Not a melody, a tone. It vibrates in your bones, in your spine, in the base of your skull. It feels like remembering something that hasn't happened yet. This is where we leave the dream, she whispers. You reach into your satchel and take out the cloth of dream she gave you. The one that wasn't hers anymore. You lay it gently across the top of the stone. The wind lifts one corner of it, as if testing its weight. Then it settles. Mibrat doesn't speak. The stone doesn't speak, but you know. You've given it back and it's grateful. You sit in silence for what could be minutes or hours. Time here has agreed to let you go. Eventually, the wind changes. Direction. The spell breaks. But softly, you stand, stretch, exhale. Mibrat walks beside you again, but this time she's slower. Her steps more tentative. You ask her how many dreams she's returned here. She shrugs. Hundreds, maybe thousands. But it's not about the number. It's about the letting go. You look behind you. The stone is still there. Still silent, but now the cloth is gone. You don't ask where. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmurs, not the kind that brings fear. The kind that sounds like distant applause. Back in the village, preparations are underway. It's the first night of a rare celestial event, a triple alignment of Venus, Mars, and a comet no one remembered until it returned last month, as if it had simply taken a long vacation. The villagers aren't holding a festival, not exactly. They're preparing a night of watching, a vigil, a listening. You sit with them. You sip the first cup of buna, then a second. By the third, the stars are out there, clear and shockingly familiar. The children lie on their backs, tracing shapes with fingers and giggles. The elders whisper soft names for constellations no one else knows. And somewhere in the sky, a new thread appears, a streak of white across the heavens. The comet. It arcs gently above. No rush, no message, just motion. Mibrat leans close. Some dreams are slow, she says, but they always come back. You lie back on the grass. The earth warm beneath you. You're not thinking anymore. You're listening. And the sky is listening back. And now, it's time to let it all soften. Let the dust settle on your shoes. Let the whispering stones keep their stories. Let the stars fold themselves gently back into the fabric of night, like soft sequins on a slowly closing curtain. You've walked far across fields and centuries, through memories stitched into baskets, along paths guided by stars that didn't demand your gaze, only offered it. You've listened to stories that didn't try to teach, only to be. You've stood in silence long enough to hear it answer. Tonight, you gave back a dream. Tonight you carried someone else's memory and let it rest. So now wherever you are, on a couch, a bed, a nest of pillows and soft confusion, just breathe. There's no riddle left unsolved, no map left to follow, only this quiet, this moment, this body softening into gravity like a feather caught in sleep. Your thoughts may, when try to wander again, that's fine. Let them drift like those old dream pebbles, gently rolled into baskets. You don't have to chase them. They know their way home. The sky is still above you, even if you can't see it right now. It remembers the goats are asleep. The sundials have turned to shadows. The comet has gone quiet and the stars, they're still listening. Good night and sweet dreams.